This is the Patriots Drive Podcast.
We are all Patriots.
Where we discuss, analyze, and answer questions to all things happening in the NFL and with our New England Patriots. Now, here's your host, Cole Kelly.
Let's go!
Welcome in to the 7th episode of the Patriots Drive Podcast. Today we have a very special guest joining us, Alex Barth from 98.5 The Sports Hub. How's it going, Alex?
Good. How we doing, guys?
Good. Glad to be watching some real football finally. And first game was on tonight, preseason, the Hall of Fame game. So watching that a little bit, but finally getting towards that time of year again.
Wait,
Yeah,
I gotta
absolutely.
ask before we get in. As Patriots fans, were we cheering for either team, or was that just football's football?
Well, I mean, we had Patriot legend Garrett Gilbert on one side, so and
Okay.
I won't root for the Steelers, so it's pretty easy for me.
Yeah.
but
I mean, I agree. It just came to my mind, like, when we're talking about the Hall of Fame game, like, Steelers, and I don't know if most Patriots fans probably aren't Cowboys fans, but anyways, just something I had come to my mind.
Yeah, kind of both teams aren't really Patriot favorites necessarily, but let's jump right in. Is this quarterback battle a true competition, and what do you think the chances are that Mac actually starts week one?
So yeah, I don't think he's going to start week one. I think they value, and Bill Belichick specifically values experience too much. I think his relationship with Cam Newton is kind of integral to the team chemistry. I think that Cam Newton is going to be the guy week one. The battle to me is Mac Jones setting himself up, and what can he do? You know, it's like, does he look like a guy who can start in week 5 or 6, or is it going to be till week 9 or 10? It's how close can he get? I don't think he can overtake Cam Newton before the start of the season, because I think they want to see him go through game plan weeks and kind of be there mentally preparing for a specific game, a specific opponent, but doing that in the background where it's not as much consequence as it is for Cam Newton. So that being said, can he – there's other things he has to be good enough at to start, like physically, reading a defense, his command of the offense, all of that. So how many of those other boxes can he check where if it's just, oh, hey, he needs to learn how we put a game plan together, now we're looking at maybe 4 or 5 weeks and we can realistically make the change. If it's, oh, there's technical stuff we need to fix too, then it's going to be a little bit longer on. So, the quarterback competition, as it were, it's not like, your normal position battle where it's, oh, who's going to be the better player to start week one or who's going to be the better player to make the roster. It's what, it's almost Mac versus himself. It's, Cam Newton is going to start right away, and that's going to be it. It's how fast can Mac get acclimated to the NFL? And he's had 2 really good days here. There's still a long way to go, but he's had 2 really good days here. He's checked some important boxes, and he's getting himself closer. The question is, how close can he get?
Yeah, you talked about he's had 2 really good days here. I heard today was one of his better days on the field in the rain. If you had to guess, how many of the days of training camp has Cam Newton won and has Mac Jones won? Just going off the eye test. Like, you're watching practice, how many days do you think Cam Newton's had that's been better than Mac Jones?
Yeah, so we're at, what are we at? Today was day 8. So I would go 5 for Cam, 2 for Mac, and I had day 1 as a draw. So
okay.
Draw the first day, Cam 5 in a row, Mac the last 2. That's what I'd give it to you. That all being said, I think, we're about halfway through chronologically here. There's going to be about 16 training camp practices. Today was 8. But when you weight what each practice means, 6 of those 8 have been non-padded. We still have joint practices, which I think are going to be huge. I put most of my weight, and I do this because Bill Belichick has talked about this. When I do my roster projection, when I'm trying to guess what the Patriots are going to do when they make their roster cuts, I put heavy weight on those joint practices, and the Patriots do that to an extent too. So, we still have those. We obviously still have 3 preseason games. We have the majority of padded practices left. So, while we may be halfway through chronologically, I think in terms of, how much of the information we have that's relevant to the final decision, or maybe 15, 20% of the way through, if that. I think that we're going to get more information than the information we have now. So there's a long way to go. And that's at every position. That's not at quarterback. There's a long way to go before some of these decisions get made. There's still practices that will have much bigger implications than the one we've seen so far. I think today's was the biggest. It was fully padded. It was in the rain, so there's a heightened level of difficulty, and that certainly counts for something. But, will I end up ranking this in the top 5 most important practices when it's all said and done? No, probably not.
So, obviously, Max had his first day of padded practice on, Tuesday, I believe. But since then, last 2 days, he's kind of bounced back. Mac had 42 reps. Cam had 24. Some of Mac's reps were against the scout team defense, but I know they have to roll in different guys. But how much stock do you put in that, where Mac had so many more reps than Cam in the past couple practices?
So again, this is tough, and I don't want to cop out, but it's, it could go one of two ways, or one of really multiple ways. Do they just want to rest Cam? Is Cam, arm's getting a little sore, it happens, you don't throw for a while, you start throwing a ton. Is that it? Is it they know what they have in Cam, and they don't feel like they need to evaluate him as much as they need to evaluate Mac, and you only get X number of reps over the course of a practice, and hey, we need to see Mac in these situations more than we need to see Cam to help us know what we've got. Is Cam maybe banged up? Is there something we don't know about there? Did Cam ask to step back because, for whatever reason? So it could be a number of things, and we don't know. Bill Belichick has this whole thing planned out. He knows the plan from now until roster cuts the Tuesday before Labor Day weekend. And my guess is the whole way through he was planning on giving Mac these extended reps these 2 days. He could flip back tomorrow, and Cam could out-rep Mac 30-10 tomorrow, and then out-rep him for the rest of practice. And then these 2 days that we're also laser-focused on now become, oh, hey, remember those 2 days where they gave Mac a ton of reps? That was neat, but it's still Cam. And again, we don't know. We're in this moment right now. These 2 practices are the most recent things we have. And I get it. I'm guilty of this all the time. We want to jump at the recent information. Football is a what have you done for me lately sport. But we don't know what the plan is. If it's all Cam from here on out, today's just a weird blip. Hey, let's get the kid some experience. Let's make sure he's ready for the joint practices. If Mac continues to out-rep Cam and we get into those joint practices and it's still Mac Jones throwing 2 passes for every one that Cam Newton does, yeah, then that's eye-raising. When those numbers start to add up and where, it's 2 days out of 8, so it's 25%. If we get to where it's more than half of the days, Mac has taken more quality reps than Cam, then you start to look at it a little closer. Right now, it's interesting. It's certainly interesting, and frankly, I'm glad because I said this is a hypothetical for the team. I know it's true for me and other people in the media. We more or less know what Cam Newton's going to be. We don't know a ton about Mac Jones. This extended chance to watch him has been great, but that could be all it is. That very well could be all it is, and it could flip back the other way. So, long answer short, it's a little too early to tell what this means right now, but it certainly is interesting.
And especially where we've only had 8 training camp practices so far. This is the first time that we've had real football in a long time. So every practice feels like it's a lot bigger than it actually is because there's been so little. I mean, you go back to just on Tuesday where it's like, okay, Mac had a horrible day. Oh, Cam's definitely the starter. Mac's not ready. And everybody overreacts. And then 2 days later, we're talking about the complete opposite. Oh, Mac has double the reps almost. Is he going to be the guy start? So it's kind of just like an overreaction or a recency bias with such little to go off of. Every moment feels like it matters more than it actually will by the time the season starts.
And the other funny thing, too, is you don't see live football for so long. And for me personally, right, I wasn't at camp last year because of COVID. I was up in the press box during the regular season. It's a different angle. Like, this is the closest I've seen live football in a long time. And, these guys are all such impressive athletes. Even the 90th guy on the roster is a more impressive. Well, Chase, you played D1, so you're exempt from this. But, the 90th guy on the roster is more impressive than you or me can ever hope to dream. Most people can never, hope to dream to be that good. So, like, for instance, we're sitting up there in the media tent today, and Marvin Hall, who's the last receiver on the depth chart, nice little double move on a post. He gets open against, I think it was D Virgin. And I'm like, oh, that was a nice route. And Matt Chatham sitting next to me. Matt Chatham played in the NFL. He played for Bill Belichick. He went through Super Bowls. He goes, was it? I was like, yeah, it looked like it. He was like, it was okay. It was pretty good. And then he showed me, he had a video of it. I was like, oh, yeah, it's just been so long since I've seen that route. It looked good. He was like, no, I get it. But, that's some of it too, is I think the good plays look great and the bad plays look horrible when you haven't seen anything in a while because you just don't have that baseline. And I think now we're getting that baseline built up, and that's certainly helpful. You have things to compare it to. But I think, maybe the first couple days more so than the last few days, but there is still that lingering, it's all very new again. And it's exciting. It's very exciting, but you have to keep that in mind as well.
But when you have like a supreme athlete, like everyone who's on that football field, and especially a guy like Marvin Hall who's got some speed to him,
right?
It's going to look a lot faster than anything the average person could do. So it's gonna stand out to you either way.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. So it looks cool, but then you see the same. The next 10 guys are on the same route, and it's like, oh, I just haven't seen that in forever. Yeah. Like the players talk about that too. It's a little different, but they go into the first day of pads, and a lot of guys say, yeah, the first time you get hit after not getting hit for 5-6 months, it shakes you up a little bit, and then you get used to it and you pretty quickly get back in the rhythm of things. But the first one or two, they catch you off guard a little bit. You kind of just forget what it's like. So there's an extent of that too when you're watching the game where you forget kind of what it looks like when it's done right.
Alex, I'm flattered by your compliment that I'm going to say a Patriots media member said that I'm an elite athlete, but I was nowhere near that. But I'll let the record show it. But no, I was just going to ask. We talked about these 2 good days that Mac's had, and I want to know what has Mac done those last 2 days, and what that he's done good that has impressed you, and what are the couple things that he might be able to improve on to keep this progress going.
So I think one thing that he definitely improved on that he's been good at over the last 2 days is having a short memory. It felt like at times early in camp, especially that day on Tuesday, the 1 of 6 day, he'd make one bad throw and you could see it in his body language. He was angry. And he'd come out and he'd rush the next throw, and it would just kind of compound and snowball on him. And that's not, you can't do that if you're a quarterback. You have to have a short memory. Now, it's not a red flag with Mac. I mean, a lot of rookie quarterbacks struggle with this early on, and this is why you want to get him those reps in camp. I thought he just, there's been times, and that was part of it, and there's other times you can just tell with the body language, and it's little things, but he's a rookie. This is new. He's learning, and that's okay. You say that sometimes, and people flip out, and they say, oh, it was a bad pick. No, I'm sure, I'm not a Jaguars camp, but I'm sure Trevor Lawrence has had moments where he's looked like that. Justin Fields, Zach Wilson, I'm missing one of them. Trey Lance, I'm sure has had moments like that as well. But there were significantly fewer of those the last 2 days. I was on with Zolak and Bertrand on Wednesday, and we were debating the term consistency because Bill Belichick said, what is he looking for in a quarterback? Consistency. And Mac, so why does Cam have the edge? Mac Jones had been the more consistent thrower, had been more accurate. Well, you talk about overall command of the offense, making changes at the line, command of the line, being able to reroute receivers in the middle of a play, right? Throw the ball to certain spots, just being on that same page. Cam had been more consistent with that. Mac was in command the last 2 days. This was his offense. He had the keys. He was driving the car, and that's really exciting to see because that's the first step. Everything else he needs to improve. He's still kind of working on his timing a little bit, figuring out NFL windows. I think he's still working on what he's doing, just communicating at the line of scrimmage. He told us today he's still sort of finding his voice at the line of scrimmage when it comes to calling out the cadence, calling out audibles, pointing out the mic, the stuff like that. But he said he's more confident with that now, and you can tell. He has better command. He's more in control. He's a quarterback, right? There's a different demeanor you want from the quarterback than the other 10 guys on the field. You didn't see that with him consistently. You saw it, but you didn't see it with him consistently the first few days. These last 2 days, you're seeing it a lot more consistently.
And Cam, that was kind of something he struggled with, which is kind of why I thought it was interesting that Bill said that was consistency. Last season, first couple games, he played really, really well. It looked like he was, back to the old Cam, MVP Cam. Against Seattle, against Miami, he didn't do as well as Seattle, but Seattle, he did fantastic throwing the football, and then we would lose to Denver. He'd play horrible, and then he played pretty solid, and we beat a good team in the Ravens. So he kind of had an up and down season as well. So he wasn't very consistent last season, and it sounds like he's kind of had his up and down days as well in camp. But overall, with Mac, kind of going back to what you're talking about with leaving the play in the past, that's also kind of something that you kind of like about him is his competitiveness and how much he loves football and how much of a perfectionist he is. It's good in one hand where, okay, this kid, like he said today in his interview, all day football, that's it, and he loves it.
Right.
So that's what he's all about. But also, it's also bad when the emotions get involved a little bit too much. But I think that's something that'll come with maturity and just time and experience in the system.
Yeah, you have to learn how to harness it. And I've tried my hardest to not, mention him in the same sentence as Tom Brady too much. But here's a perfect example. I think Brady will kick himself for mistakes a ton, and he doesn't like making mistakes a ton. But like you said, harness it. He knows how to harness it. You never really see him lose control. He'll get angry, right? But, he comes back out and he makes the changes he needs to make. He doesn't let it consume him. He uses it. He doesn't let it, grind on him. I think it was grinding on Mac. I don't think he knew how to use that frustration. And it's something he's learning. And this is going to be, it's gotten better, but this is going to be a multi-year process. This isn't something you just fix overnight. You just wake up one day and you learn how to harness that kind of energy. But he's starting to work on it. And again, it's the perfect terminology, harness it. He needs to learn how to harness it and not let it derail him, because it's very easy to get derailed after a couple bad plays. That's part of what separates the great quarterbacks and the all-time great quarterbacks. And it really, any sport, any player, what separates the greats from the really greats, everybody's going to make mistakes. Even the best make mistakes. It's so easy to let that kind of throw you off for a couple plays or a day or whatever. You got to figure out how to turn that around. And it looks like he's starting to figure out how to turn that around.
So what are some of the things that you've seen from Cam? I mean, obviously last year going at the end of the season, I personally thought he did not help his case the last couple games to re-sign with the Patriots. Now, we brought him back, and now looking back on it, I'm happy we brought him back. We have him in the system for another year. But what are some improvements you've been seeing from Cam Newton in this training camp from the end of last year?
There's a few. I think that, first off, he has a better understanding of the offense, and he talked about that in the offseason. He was a little overwhelmed by the playbook last year. You can tell some of the timing things that they ultimately ended up taking out of their offense by the end of the year last year, because they were struggling with them. And some of that was Cam, some of that was the receivers, but they had to take them out, and that's a huge part of the Patriots offense. So they're running those again, and he seems to be in sync with these receivers and have the timing figured out. I think his ability to throw the ball in a finesse sense, in that, touch passes, he's been good with that. There was a beautiful throw on an out route to Brandon Bolden on the side of the end zone where he just kind of lofted the ball perfectly to him. There's another one, Hunter Henry in the back of the end zone where Kyle Duggar's right on his back. Henry's kind of running to the goal line, and he puts it right over his shoulder, gives Henry enough room to slide, get the feet down, make the catch. Duggar can't make a play on the ball. Just like a perfectly placed throw, but it wasn't, we know he has the great arm strength. We know he can zip a ball into a tight window before a defender can close. What we didn't necessarily see last year is a deft hand and being able to place that ball in over a defender. He's done that. I think he's been better communicating at the line of scrimmage. I think he has a better idea what's going on up front. So it's nice, because last year he would screw up and he would take ownership for messing up and say, I need to be better. But he never really improved what he said he needed to be better at. And it was tough, because you appreciate the guy for being honest and his accountability, but you're waiting for the results. And it's hard to improve on some of the things he needed to improve on in season. And then he came back in the offseason, he talks to us, he says, I need to improve my pre-snap, I need to improve, just my overall knowledge of the offense, I need to improve my timing. And you're like, okay, he's saying all the right things, but he's done this before and there never really was a change. Well, now here he comes in camp, and everything he told us in the offseason he worked on, you're seeing it on the field. You're seeing him better in those elements of his game. So that's been really encouraging. And we'll see if he can put it all together. Again, it's been a couple rough days here today. I think his accuracy was off today. He really had looked until today like a different quarterback. Today, there were some throws in the ground. There were some throws leading receivers back in that probably shouldn't have. But up until then, he looked like a new guy. So we'll see if he can rebound again. Mac had a bad day. He bounced back. Cam had a bad day. You look to see how he bounces back. But overall, he's really improved specifically. It's funny. It sounds obvious to say, but he's improved in the areas that he most needed to improve in. Based on what he failed at last year, the things he failed at the most, he's improved in the most. And that's encouraging, because it means they can get back to more of what they want to do.
And that's something that last year you kind of saw was it seemed like he only had two modes. He had, I'm going to throw the ball 110 miles an hour, and I'm going to do a little lob pass on like a screen or a swing route, something like that. So he looks like he's throwing the ball the same way and with the same zip on a 50-yard bomb and a 10-yard in cut or in route. You know what I mean? So that was something, throwing the ball with touch and knowing when to put extra zip on it and when to kind of put a little loft on it and fit it into a spot that you need to place the ball. But kind of going back to Mac, how's Mac's athleticism look compared to the statue mobility that the media kind of labeled him with?
Yeah, it's there. It's there. I mean, he did slide the other day, and it was atrocious. I mean, he looked like he'd never slid before. So
was it as bad as the one earlier, for the Alabama highlight? Do you remember that one?
Yeah, it was. Well, he actually got his foot out first this time instead of doing a barrel roll. So it's progress.
Yep.
But
all right.
He's not going to be an athletic quarterback in the sense that he's going to give you much with his legs. He might be able to pick up 5 or 6 yards here and there on a scramble if the defense really sleeps on him. But his movement within the pocket has been outstanding. There was one play where this was, I want to say day 5. There's a blitz coming. I don't know that he recognized it pre-snap, but the guy's coming on the blind side. There's no way Matt could have seen him. Yet he's still just a half a step to the side, evades the rusher, and boom, gets the ball right out. He hits the receiver in stride. And it was like, whoa. Like, that's not a play you usually see a rookie make. That's a play a guy 3, 4, 5, 6 years in the league makes. He had another one the other day, honestly, on his interception, where there's a blitz coming. Because the trick is, if you're trying to evade, people think just get out of the way as soon as possible. That's not always the case, because if you move too early, the defender can adjust. He timed his little shuffle perfectly, moves a step to his right, and then he actually put, it was a timing play. You could tell the chemistry's there. Matt Judon's running, not Matt Judon. I keep doing that. Jonnu Smith is running up the seam.
Oh, the back shoulder.
And, right, so Matt can't get him. Matt can't lead him from the angle, just the way the defender's playing him, but he puts it on his back shoulder. Smith recognizes that's the throw, turns the shoulder back, puts his hands up, and the ball hit him in the hands. He couldn't catch it. It pops up in the air. McCourty grabs it. But for Mac, he, clean drop back, finds the rush, evades it properly, reestablishes the read because he's looking at the rusher, so he's got to quickly reestablish what's going on downfield, reestablishes the read, timing, chemistry throw to the receiver, puts the ball where only his receiver can make a play on it. And the receiver doesn't ultimately make a play, but Josh McDaniels said the other day, he was asked about training camp stats. He says, they look more at the intention than the stats. What were you trying to do? What did you see? What were you planning on doing here? And that's a play to me where I wouldn't be surprised if they look at that and say, they tell Mac, you know what, you threw a pick. We're not worried about it. You did everything right there. It happens. That's the game. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if they tell him, like, we're putting this in the positive column. This is a good play for you. We want you to do more of this. So, what was the original question? I just went on a tangent there. His pocket movement, movement's been one of his best traits. The way the little subtle movements to move himself in the pocket, extend that pocket, get away from pass rushers. That's been excellent.
And not only like just pocket mobility, but you kind of saw him showcase it a little bit when he did his pro day. His little throws on the runs where he moves a little bit out of the pocket, just kind of evading the rush a little bit. I think we'll probably see him more just stationary in the pocket, kind of obviously like Brady did for 20 years. But the ability to be able to, if you need to, move out to your right, move out to your left, and make those throws on the run, I think definitely will be another weapon that a guy can use, especially somebody who's considered more of a pocket quarterback.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, anybody who's watched the Patriots knows how valuable that can be. You buy that extra second, that can be the difference between having to throw the ball away and a touchdown. So it's very encouraging to see him there, because that's one of those things I think the coaching staff's going to look at. Bill Belichick and Josh McDaniels are going to look at when they decide how ready is this kid. What's his presence in the pocket? Is he just, if anybody comes close, is he going to turtle and take the sack, or is he going to try to extend plays? Is he going to get too aggressive and try to extend too many plays? I think he's been good moving around in the pocket, but he hasn't been too aggressive. He's been smart about it. That's an area where I think he's pretty close to ready, if not ready.
What about some of the offensive additions that New England had in the offseason? A lot of people were excited when we signed Henry, when we signed Jonnu Smith. Maybe some people thought the Aguilar contract was a little different or a little too
Expensive.
much money, but I think Nelson's I think Nelson's had a great training camp so far. So who are some of the new additions on the offensive side of the ball that you have been impressed with?
Sure. Honestly, most of them. These guys have come in and just been great. I think Aguilar and Bourne have been excellent. Nelson Aguilar has been interesting. I think we've gotten the full Nelson Aguilar experience in that the speed's legit. I mean, they haven't had a wide receiver this fast since Brandon Cooks, but there's a subtlety to his motions, and you don't realize how good he is at running some of the underneath stuff, the slants, the drags, that kind of thing. The way he can get in and out of his break, that he's dangerous there too. So he's been impressive, but then there's been some balls that he's dropped, and I don't know that they're all necessarily like right in between the numbers from the jugs machine. Your hand's right there. But they're balls that, you want your number one receiver. You mentioned the contract. You want a guy you're paying that much. You want that guy to be able to catch. So, and I think that's what it's going to be. And it's going to be interesting to see how Patriots fans respond to what he does, because I think there's going to be some days where he's a highlight reel and he could be a 3-catch, 100-yard guy in a game. I think that he absolutely has that potential to do that on a somewhat regular basis. But he's going to drop some bad balls, too. He's going to drop some balls that you'd expect him to catch. And you hope the good outweighs the bad. That's what happened in Vegas last year. That's what the case has been so far, even with his drops. The good has certainly outweighed the bad. He's been impressive. So, I think he's had a strong camp. Kendrick Bourne has shown up, and very strong hands catcher. He knows how to go out and get the ball away from his body. And you look at the kind of guys the Patriots have had here who have been good at that in the past. And I think about Brandon LaFell. I think about Brandon Lloyd. I think about Malcolm Mitchell. These hands catchers that can go out and just snatch the ball out of the air. Kendrick Bourne, those are three very good receivers. I don't know that I'm putting Kendrick Bourne in that class just yet, but he reminds me of those guys a little bit. That's sort of the path. And then the tight ends have been they actually started a little slow, I thought, but I wonder if that was just a chemistry thing. Jonnu Smith didn't practice at all in the spring. Hunter Henry missed a couple sessions. So, whereas the wide receivers were there for every OTA and then minicamp. So I think now that they're on the same page, Hunter Henry really has started to build a chemistry with both Cam Newton and Mac Jones. They both seem to look his way a ton. Jonnu Smith's been impressive too. He's made some nice catches, and they're both showing up big time now that the pads are on as blockers, right? When they do those one-on-ones and they have the offensive lineman face the defensive lineman. They've thrown the linebackers in there, the tight ends in there a couple times, and those guys have held their own. And with how much this offense projects to run the ball, you're going to need tight ends that can block. And they both look like they're up for the challenge. So all the pieces seem to be fitting. And that's not always the case, whether it's the draft or free agency. They sometimes bring guys in and you think you know what the plan is and, in theory, and you see it in practice and it doesn't work. So far, at least on the offensive side of the ball, just about everybody they've brought in, all the big names they've brought in, you can see what the plan is for them.
And that's kind of what I say to people who think we overpaid for certain guys like Nelson Aguilar. Some people think we gave Judon a little bit too much money, but all the additions we made and all the money we spent in free agency, you at least see the role they're going to play and how they're all going to fit together. You don't see any puzzle pieces out of place. They all seem like they're going to fit together. Seems like Aguilar is going to be a guy who can open up a lot of space, take the top off of defense, and make safeties pay attention to him to open up the field for Hunter Henry and Jonnu Smith, the guys in the middle of the field. And so I think not only on the offensive, but both the defensive side of the ball, I think you can kind of envision a role for all these guys. So it doesn't seem like, even though $11 million a year might be a little bit much for a guy like Nelson Aguilar, I think the production you're going to get out of him and the role he's going to be used in here is going to be worth that money.
Yeah, again, we'll see. It's going to come down to the drops. That's what it's going to come down to. Can he hold on to the football? If he does, yeah, he has a real chance to be worth that money. Evan Lazar, who I host the Patriots Beat podcast with on CLNS Media, I'm trying to remember. He had the numbers, and Aguilar had 9 drops last year, and he finished with just shy of 1,000 yards. If he hauls in half of those, he's a 1,300-yard receiver. So, I mean, it kind of shows you the difference drops can make. They can be, at least statistically, substantial. So, and a lot of people tie the money to the stats. It's not the best way to do it, but you can go about it that way, and that's how most fans are going to analyze it. So that's why, if he's catching the ball regularly, yeah, I absolutely think he can put up the stats that kind of go with that money.
Especially for a guy who's averaging close to 19 yards a catch. Each drop is going to be I mean, each drop is going to be a significant amount of yards opportunity-wise for a guy who runs deep routes like that. But kind of sticking with that wide receiver room, we've seen a lot of headlines. And N'Keal had 6 catches today or yesterday. Yesterday, I think. So kind of what have you seen from him, and does his success so far in camp give you any hope that he can actually be a productive receiver this year, or do you think he's kind of still on the outside looking in when it comes to real-time games?
Yeah, N'Keal's in a really weird spot because, like I said, those top 3 guys, Bourne, Aguilar, Myers, they've been great. And then you have you have Gunnar Olszewski, who's going to make the team as a punt returner. I don't know how much he's going to contribute as a wide receiver, but he's not going anywhere. He was an all-pro. And then you have Isaiah Zuber and Christian Wilkerson, who are, can be core special teams guys. And then you look at N'Keal, who's obviously playing well, but right now he's the 4th receiver. He might be the 5th. And that guy is really not going to play a ton this year. With primary 12 personnel sets, you're looking at 2 wide receivers, probably max, with more than 50% usage rate. Everybody after that's probably going to be under 50. So, okay, Bourne, Aguilar, or Myers. One of those guys 2 of those guys are going to be in the 90s. One of those guys is going to be hovering right around 50. Or they split it more and it's like 80, 60, 40, whatever. And then, all right, so now you have your 4th wide receiver. That guy's probably going to play 10 to 15% of the snaps. That's not a ton. Now, if that guy can play special teams, okay, now here you go. Here's, you're adding depth to your roster. If not, you're using a roster spot on somebody who's going to play offense, defense, special teams combined 5%, 6% of your total snaps. That's not great. So as good as N'Keal is, would they rather use that roster spot on Christian Wilkerson, who's going to contribute in the kicking game, or a guy at another position? Does that help you keep the extra running back? Is if a guy like J.J. Taylor, Brandon Bolden's on the fence, and I don't think Bolden should be. He's had a great camp, but he might be. Would you rather keep N'Keal Harry or Brandon Bolden, who's going to contribute? Would you rather keep an extra linebacker? Is this how you get Raekwon McMillan on the roster? An extra safety? Is this how Miles Bryant sticks? Do they really want to protect Quinn Nordine? And maybe they want to keep an extra kicker. I don't think they'd go that way. But my point is, N'Keal's not just competing with the other receivers. I think he's competing with a lot of these bubble guys, and it's not going to be easy for him to catch those top 3 guys because they're playing so well. And he's never played special teams. He has 21 special team snaps over 2 years. So, and he hasn't done it in camp. So, to kind of justify the roster spot that way feels far-fetched. The trade request feels the most likely right now because there you go. You have a guy who's playing well. You don't have room for him. You trade him. That's how this generally works. Normally, it's not a first-round pick who's 23 years old. But, yeah, he's kind of in between. And with bubble guys, he's a very unique case. And with the Patriots, people like to call the Patriots unpredictable and Bill Belichick unpredictable. That's true to an extent, but when you do anything for as long as Bill's coached, there's going to be patterns. You're going to start to pick up on tendencies. And that has made the Patriots, I don't want to say predictable over the last few years, but you can kind of see certain things coming if you read the tea leaves. This is a brand new situation with N'Keal Harry. They've never really been in a spot like this. So it's really hard to project what they're going to do. Again, I think a trade's probably the best possibility, but they may want to keep 6 receivers. I don't know how they do that with their roster. They're projecting to keep 4 tight ends. Now you have a fifth of the roster between 2 positions. So he's to go back to what I was saying, normally with a bubble guy, they play good, you keep them. They don't play good, it gets a little bit tricky. With N'Keal, it's almost the better he plays, the trickier it gets. If he'd sucked, all right, they trade him for a 7th-round pick. We're done here. Because he's played so good, you have to think twice about it. And him and Bill have downplayed the trade request. You have to think twice about
it. It wouldn't surprise me if N'Keal Harry's one of those guys that might be a surprise cut because he is having such a good training camp. But like you mentioned, Bill Belichick and the Patriots value the special teamers. We've seen guys come in New England, Matthew Slater, Justin Bethel. They make careers out of special teams. So any way that Bill can find a guy that can do multiple things, kind of like that in one of those Swiss Army knife rolls or something, can contribute offensively like Isaiah Zuber can on fly sweeps. We saw a little last year, and then play 3-4 special teams. It wouldn't surprise me if N'Keal Harry's a cut candidate. So then I fall to the topic where I would rather have him traded, even if it is for a 6th-round pick. Like, I don't want to see a 1st-round pick get cut for nothing. I want to see us at least get some sort of trade pick for him, whatever that is.
Yeah, I don't think, and there's a couple guys in camp like this year where they're not bad players. They're good football players, but just the way the roster is structured, there might not be a spot for them on this team. They're not going to get cut. And Nikhil's the chief example of this. He's not going to get cut. He's too good to get cut. They've invested too much in him to cut him. Mm-hmm. If he makes the team, he makes the team. But if you can trade him, pick up future assets, open up a roster spot, that's probably overall better for the team moving forward than keeping that player on the roster. But yeah, you're right. They're not just going to cut a player like N'Keal Harry. Some people have talked this way about Sony Michel. I think they're keeping him, but some people have mentioned this about Sony Michel. I think Juwan Bentley's a guy who could fall into this category. Very good football player. Is not going to get cut, but there is some interesting trade value there.
Yeah, and especially if you can get something back for a guy, you're going to do that. There's going to be, with all the additions we've made this offseason to the wide receiver room, to the defensive line, all this stuff, we're going to have some good football players who aren't going to make the cut, or who aren't going to make the team. So that's just kind of the way the cookie crumbles when you actually have talent to work with, unlike last year where there's a lot of football players who really probably shouldn't have been on a 53-man roster. This year, we got a lot of talent, and we got depth at different positions where some guys that would have been starters last year might not even make the team this year. So that's kind of going to be, I guess, a different situation, and that's why it's tough to kind of pick apart this roster and really narrow it down to a top 53.
Yeah, they're I don't know that their top end talent is what we're used to it being. Obviously, Stephon Gilmore, Michael Onwenu, Jake Bailey. I mean, they got some players who are towards the top half of the league at their position, but we'll call it their 10 to 40 depth guys who are probably mid-tier roster players, 10 to 30. They got maybe 50, 60 guys that qualify in that range, and that's unprecedented depth. So that's what makes it so interesting is they have a lot of comparable players. So you really have to go down when you're looking at one player versus another player. It might not be as simple as from a bird's eye view, 10,000 feet, who's played better. You got to look at age. You got to look at contract. You got to look at scheme fit. You got to really go down the tiebreakers with some of these guys to figure out who maybe is the better option.
How good has this offensive line looked, and has anybody in specific stood out to you?
Yeah, they've looked good. They've looked really good. I think Michael Onwenu has been great, and that's encouraging to see because he's, after playing a year at tackle, he's back at guard. So you always wonder how that might affect somebody, but he hasn't missed a beat. Trent Brown's looked good. He was banged up in Vegas with the Raiders. You don't know what his condition is coming back. He looks like the guy he did in 2018. So they've been, they're in good shape. They're going to have one of the best offensive lines in football again this year, assuming everybody stays healthy. Even if they don't, they've got impressive depth between Ted Karras, Onwenu's positional versatility. I personally like Justin Herron a lot. I think he's a good player. So the offensive lines look good, and that should be the strength of their offense. As good as the tight ends are, as good as the wide receivers have looked, as good as some of these backs are. I'm a big Damian Harris guy. Their offensive line is going to be what makes the offense go.
Yeah, and another position that New England's found value in the last couple of years between James Devlin and Jakob Johnson, kind of that fullback spot. Do you think that they're going to keep a fullback on this roster this year? And if not, do you think that maybe Dalton Keene slips in at that tight end spot and can play one of those versatile tight ends that can still go out on passes, maybe flank him out like we've seen with James Devlin, but he's just a little bit more of a pass catcher and more of a threat?
Yeah, so I think you nailed it. I think, keeping a traditional fullback, Jakob Johnson, as much as I like Jakob Johnson, I think keeping a traditional fullback, it's kind of like I talked about N'Keal Harry. How much is that guy really going to play? And Johnson, he contributes on special teams, so maybe that's his way onto the roster, but you're going to be a 12 personnel a ton. You're going to use those two tight ends. You want to use those two tight ends a ton. Are you going to come out 22 heavy a lot? Are you going to come out with just one wide receiver on the field a lot? I just can't see him doing that. As much as I'd love to see it, as a fan of old school smash mouth football, I don't think you're going to see a ton of 22 personnel. Jonnu Smith has some ability as that move fullback. Like you mentioned, Dalton Keene, if he can get on the field, and we haven't seen him yet, he's on PUP. But if Dalton Keene can get on the field, he offers you some value as a move fullback. And so, maybe you turn the position into that. You try to go the Greg Kittle route. And then, if they really, some people say, what happens on the goal line? When they really want to go power I, goal line, third and short, fourth and short, we've seen Bill do this before. He'll put maybe Justin Herron back there. He'll put maybe Lawrence Guy back there. They used the Landon Roberts as a fullback, right? Maybe we see Juwan Bentley, Raekwon McMillan, Terez Hall back there. They'll figure out a way to get a lead blocker back there if they don't have that guy on the roster. And the other interesting thing about this is Jakob Johnson applies for the International Pathway Program. So you can label him International Pathway. You don't have to pass him through waivers. You don't risk another team signing him. He wouldn't be able to play this year, but, like we just laid out, there's not really room for a fullback this year anyway. And then you revisit it next year, and you'll still have him under contract next year. He'd have to agree to that, and maybe he thinks he can go somewhere else and play, and he has every right to do that. But the way I look at it, I think that roster spot's better used elsewhere. And I think that they have other guys who can play tight end more or play fullback in a way that better fits this offense. And again, when they get down near the goal line, they got no shortage of big bodies they can throw out in front.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was going to say. What kind of similar to what you said with the whole wide receiver position. When with what they added at the tight end position, and where you got two guys who are top 10 in their position that you're going to want to use often and use their talents, the money you spent on them, you're going to want to have them on the field as often as possible. So some wide receivers aren't going to get as much playing time this year because it's not going to be the best set that we're going to be using them in as often. We're not going to use a fullback as often. So especially with how much depth, like we were just talking about, this roster has, it's going to be tough to try to keep some of those guys when they might only play 5% of the snaps. So, but kind of sticking with that running position, I've heard some good things about Sony Michel so far in camp. Have you noticed any real difference with him, or does it kind of look like the same Sony?
He's got a little more burst, more or less the same. The thing with Sony is I don't think his ability is a question. It's just, can he stay healthy? And that's, you don't answer that question until it's answered, right? He's healthy until he's not. So I think that's what it comes down to with him, but he looks good. He's off to a good start. It's the first time in the NFL that he's been present for the start of a camp. He's always been on PUP or NFI. So strong start to him, contract year. He is certainly trying to make the most of it. But, yeah, he's been good.
The defensive side of the ball is obviously something that I was a little disappointed in last year. Gilmore got hurt. We had a ton of opt-outs. We had lost a couple guys due to free agency. So who are some of the surprises, or who are some of the new additions that you're looking forward to watching on this Patriots defense this year?
Yeah, Matt Judon's been excellent. Excellent start to camp for him. He's been great, and I think he's going to stay great. You can see why they paid him all that money. Christian Barmore, he hasn't done much outside of the one padded practice, so it's tough to say he's dominated. He didn't practice today, but that one padded practice, he was unreal. And, when they drafted him, everybody thought, all right, here's a guy, an interior pass rusher. He's going to play Adam Butler's role, and, he'll do that to start, and we'll see how he develops. And I think that is certainly realistic, but he comes out in that practice, and he's blowing up running plays. He's playing 5 technique, and he's blowing up running plays. Mm-hmm. So now it's like, okay, can this guy, you think, can he be in 2-3 years become a 3-down player? It's just one practice, but he looked like a 3-down defensive tackle. And his skill set, I think, complements Devon Godshaw so well. Another guy who's gotten off to a great start, has been a menace knocking down pass at the line. I think if you can alternate him and Godshaw, that's going to give offenses a headache. So I'm looking forward to him too. Another guy who's not, a new addition, but I'm really fascinated by is Adrian Phillips. And I think, so we talk a lot about the year 1 to year 2 jump, right? Rookies to the second year and how much guys can improve just by having a year under their belt. Obviously, Adrian Phillips isn't a rookie, far from it. He was an all-pro when he got to New England. But he was playing a new role last year. He was playing basically linebacker. And he told us at one point that he really hadn't done anything like that since high school. And now he comes back this year, and he'll be in a similar role. Probably won't be exactly the same, but it will be similar. But now he has some experience and some confidence playing in that spot. And I wonder if he's a guy who could take sort of a second-year jump now that he has some comfort playing in that role. So he's had a great start to camp. Him and Jonnu Smith, they've had some absolute battles going back and forth. That's been some of the best battles at camp. But he's another guy I look at where I think he could have a really big year.
I was just going to kind of comment on Christian Barmore real quick. I loved that pick coming out of Alabama. I thought that he, for his size, his mobility, agility, acceleration is freakishly athletic. And we talk about Alabama always getting the best, recruits, so it's no surprise that he was playing at Alabama. But the dude can move down the line of scrimmage. He can take on double teams. He can get to the passer, or he can get pass rush. He can get to the quarterback. I think that is going to be down the road a couple years when he's fully developed. Belichick's kind of gotten him out. I still think he's a little raw, but he has all the tools to be a freakishly good, big, disruptive defensive lineman in the NFL.
Yeah, no, I think so. The question was, how quickly would he develop? Because some of his skills you could see the raw ability, but some of his skills coming out of Alabama were a bit raw. But again, he shows up in that practice and he's blowing up the Patriots starting offensive line against the run, which wasn't supposed to be a strong suit. And you can't help but look at that and say, what did he pick up in the last 3-4 months that he's now coming out and doing that? And how quick of a learner is this kid? Because if he's that quick of a learner, you're looking at a guy who could be a 3-down player easily by November.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was going to say that because that's kind of his strong suit was his ability to rush the passer, and that was something that everybody was a little bit concerned about was what his role was going to be, and if he was kind of just going to be more of a 3rd-down guy when it's time to pin the ears back and go rush the passer from that defensive tackle position. And that was kind of a thing he struggled with was stopping the run. So his ability to already show his first padded practice that he's improved tremendously from the start of training camp or even from college when he was last in it is really hopeful. But another guy that's not necessarily a new addition this year, but a guy who wasn't playing for us last year was Dante Hightower. So I think having him back is going to be, tremendous. A guy who's a leader in the locker room, a captain. He's somebody who's been in this defense his whole career for years. He makes big plays when it matters. He knows what's going on the defense side of the ball, gets everybody in the right position. So I think having him back is going to be just a tremendous addition along with all these new guys. I think his presence in that locker room is just going to help everybody continue to improve and build that chemistry quickly.
Yeah, who was it who talked about that the other day? It might have been Gerard Mayo. It was one of the coaches. No, it was Juwan Bentley. Said that between Hightower and Van Noy, it's not just that you get their talent back, you get their leadership back. And, both on the field and off. I think you kind of touched on it. Mm-hmm. As much as the Patriots missed Dante Hightower schematically last year, and they missed him a ton schematically last year, just what he offered pre-snap, identifying what the offense is doing, making sure everybody's in the right place. There were a lot of young linebackers out there, Juwan Bentley had the most NFL experience in that linebacking core, and he had played 19 NFL games going into last season. So that tells you the kind, there's talent out there. There's a ton of inexperience. And, there were times where you were just like, man, if only they had a veteran they could put out there to just kind of help all these guys, stay, not necessarily focused. What's the word I'm looking for?
But locked in and, coordinated.
Not even locked in, just, oriented. Or that's the word, oriented. They could just help these guys be a little oriented. And, you thought it might be Brandon Copeland, and he was a little bit before he got hurt. But, obviously you're not going to have as young of a linebacker group out there this year. They fixed that. They added some veterans. They added Matt Judon, Kyle Van Noy, and Raekwon McMillan, too. I'd put him in there. But, Hightower is going to make a guy like Josh Uche so much better, just being on the field with him. He's going to make a guy in Anthony Jennings so much better. He's going to make Chase Winovich better. And he's just going to make the whole defense better because, they were without Chung, too. They had a really solid communicator at 3 levels of the defense. They had Hightower, Chung, and McCourty as these 3 guys who kind of, were the in-between for everybody on the field on defensive snaps and made sure everybody was on the same page. And then they go, from 3 of those guys last year down to just 1 of those guys, with Chung opting out, and obviously he won't be back, and then Hightower opting out as well. So what he brings a communicator, what he brings pre-snap, we heard everybody knows the famous Brady quote, right, about having the answers to the test. When he comes out on the field, he looks at the opposing defense. Dante Hightower is a guy who's played enough football and is tremendously smart, and he's a guy, that kind of guy who sort of has the answers to the test. And having him out there is just going to make every other defensive player better before the ball's even snapped.
I can't remember who said it, but I saw a quote a few weeks ago. This was from in the past, but a guy asked somebody, how how'd you make that play was great. How'd you make it or whatever? And he said, Donta Hightower told me what was coming. So
yeah,
I mean, having a guy,
we've heard guys say
like
that a few times. We've heard guys say that a few times.
Yeah, exactly. So having a guy like that who's that was something that like Luke Kuechly was super good at. You know what I mean? Calling the plays out before the offense even ran the play. So when you got a guy like that, all that does is just help everybody know what's going on, especially when you got young guys in there who have such a lack of experience. So having somebody like that at multiple levels of the defense keeps everybody coordinated together and everybody knows what's going on and everybody's on the same page. So yeah, having him back is going to be absolutely tremendous for this defense. And last year was a bit of a tough year, but having some of those young guys, the rookies, Uche, Duggar, and then another young guy, Chase Winovich, those guys got a lot of valuable playing time last year that they usually wouldn't have gotten. So it was a struggle. The record wasn't what we would hope it would be, but those guys did get a lot of valuable experience that they wouldn't have got in the past. So now when they had that experience last year and now they come back and they got this veteran leadership, I think it's just going to make their growth exponentially better.
Yeah, and you can already kind of see it. You can see them working together in practice, and Josh Uche's talked about it. Like I said, Joanne Bentley brought it up. Just having Donta Hightower around. And the other thing about him as a player, too, I should add, I mean, he lost some weight in a good way, and he's moving pretty nimbly, especially for a guy his age who's had his injuries. And he's always been a very well-rounded player. That's one of my favorite parts about him. I think that's what a lot of people admire about him. He's had a well-rounded game. But the one area you didn't see him in a ton was coverage. And he's coming out here. He was manning up Trey Nixon the other day. So we'll see what he looks like coming downhill with some weight off, because we'll see if he still brings that same thud. And we won't know that until we see it in a game. But if he can add some coverage snaps to his repertoire, it's going to make him that much more dangerous and that much more of a chess piece.
But also losing that weight, just you could notice it immediately just seeing the reports of during OTAs, Josh Uche flying off the line of scrimmage, Josh Uche just like snapping like he knows a snap count. He's jumping, jumping off the line with just being explosive, just running right by any offensive lineman. So losing a little bit of that weight may make his strength go down just a little bit, but it also makes him have better ability to cover different running backs or whoever they match him up with, and also get off the line a little bit quicker.
Yeah, I could see that. Again, we got to see what it looks like, because some guys come back, they lose the weight, and they have even more pop because they just, they change their center of gravity, they change their body makeup. So we won't know until we see it, but it's an interesting development.
What are some of your thoughts on this secondary position? We've hit on it before. We have a lot of young guys there. We signed Jalen Mills, which might have been one of the more head-scratching signings in the offseason, I would say, just because of I don't see where he has a distinct role. Now, it's one of those guys that Belichick loves that can play multiple things. But do you think that the Stephon Gilmore situation at all is going to factor into where we play Jalen Mills and the lack of depth that we have?
I certainly think so. I think you're spot on there. The Mills signing to me is Jalen Mills was, what was the stat? Mike Reese had this. He was the only player in the league last year to line up at least 15 snaps at 7 different positions. He lined up at box safety, box safety, deep safety, slot corner, outside corner, linebacker, and he even lined up 16, 17 times the defensive end. So that's the value in Jalen Mills. You sign him, you give him that money because, hey, we can plug and play you where we need you. I make the analogy to baseball, right? Brock Holt. The value in Brock Holt wasn't that he was a great player. He was a good player, but you needed to give anybody a day off. Right. You need to give your second baseman a day off. You need to give your left fielder a day off. You need to give your third baseman a day off. You could put Brock Holt in there. Jalen Mills is kind of like, it's a little different, but Jalen Mills is kind of like a Brock Holt of football. Now, there's a reason Jalen Mills entered the league as an outside corner, played 4 years at outside corner, and then moved to safety. He's getting burned all the time. He just wasn't a good enough outside corner. You sign him, he's going to play out there a little bit because you're going to play him everywhere. He shouldn't play out there a ton. But without Stephon Gilmore, they don't really have a great option for that second outside corner spot. Jonathan Jones is going to be in the slot, Miles Bryant behind him. Both good players. J.C. Jackson's on one side. That's great. even if and when Stephon Gilmore comes back, and you have Gilmore and Jackson as your 1 and 2, great upside. The depth there scares me a little bit because Jason McCourty, this is the stat I keep giving out. Cole, you said you watched the show I do with Evans. You probably know what's coming.
50%, 65%? What was
65%. Jason McCourty played 65% of the Patriots' defensive snaps last year. Part of the strength of the Patriots secondary when they're good is they rotate. They'll give those top 2 corners a series off here or there and keep them fresh compared to the wide receivers on the other side. You also had, Gilmore got hurt. J.C. Jackson filled in. He played an important role. 65% of the snaps. He's now in Miami. They didn't bring in an obvious replacement at the outside cornerback position to replace Jason McCourty. You'd like to think it would be Juwan Williams. They used a second-round pick on him 2 years ago. I never thought he was a bad player. He just didn't play because the depth ahead of him, again, McCourty, Jackson, and Gilmore, no team has that at the cornerback position. That's great. He was buried. Here's his chance. He's not buried anymore. McCourty's gone. Gilmore's on PUP. Here's his chance to come out and really show, all right, here's why I was a second-round pick. I can pick up the baton. I can be a starting outside corner for this team. He hasn't done that. He's had a rough camp. So then you look at, all right, Michael Jackson, the guy they got from the Lions last August for a 7th-round pick. Same idea, big physical corner, the kind of guy they like, but he had a nice pass breakup the other day, but that's just about it for highlights from him. And then it's been Jalen Mills in that role quite a bit because simply I don't think they know who else to put out there. We've seen Justin Bethel get some snaps out there, and I think he'll do that in the preseason because right now, the way the roster looks right now, they may need him to do that. Now, I think, they always add somebody externally after roster cutdowns. Somebody breaks free elsewhere that they bring in. I think outside corner is the spot to look for an external acquisition. I was kind of surprised they didn't sign Trey Kirkpatrick when they met with him in May. I thought he would have been a perfect fit. But, the secondaries look good. The safeties will look great. J.C. Jackson's had a phenomenal camp. 2 more pass breakups today, 7 total in 8 days, plus an interception. So he's been good. But the depth there scares me a little bit. Even when Gilmore comes back, the depth there scares me a little bit. Maybe Juwan Williams comes alive once the joint practices, get going, and all of a sudden, okay, here's the guy. If not, like you said, with Jalen Mills, it is a little scary if he's going to be playing out there. I think there's a role for him in this defense where he's productive and he's helping. That role doesn't involve him playing outside corner 50% of the time.
And I think that Juwan Williams had some flashes a little bit last year, maybe covering tight ends. He had some good games, but just overall, that cornerback depth scares me a little bit as well, to where you sign a guy like Jalen Mills for 4 years, $24 million. You obviously envision some type of role for him. And maybe that is just, like you said, kind of a Brock Holt of football. Somebody who can kind of play all different positions. He can go outside corner, he can play safety, like you said. But I personally, it was kind of a head scratcher for me because I personally would have rather seen them sign somebody at that position of need who can play that outside corner, who can fill in those Jason McCourty snaps, because we got plenty of guys at safety right now. We got Kyle Duggar, we got Adrian Phillips, Devin McCourty. We got different guys who are going to be playing a lot of snaps there. So I don't know, unless they envision using multiple safety, like Devin McCourty, Kyle Duggar, and then Jalen Mills. You know what I mean? It's just, I feel like having an outside corner would be a lot more valuable. Like somebody who's solid at outside corner would be more valuable than having another safety, a position that I think we kind of have some depth at. Yeah,
so and this is where that signing gets interesting. I think if they really wanted an outside corner, there were other, I just can't imagine they signed Jalen Mills to play outside corner. A guy that versatile with that history, this team, they didn't sign him to stick him at one position. They will if they have to. I think that there's some plan at outside corner. And maybe it was Juwan Williams, and now the plan's not working out, and they're going to have to do something else. Like, maybe that's it, but Jalen Mills has too much versatility for them to lock him into one position. I just can't see Bill Belichick, of all people, using him that way. And I think he'll do what he needs to do to make sure that he doesn't have to stick Mills at outside corner.
Yeah. Last kind of position before we get into our little game that we have with
the biggest position battle of all.
Yeah.
The kicker competition, right? It's always important to have a good kicker.
Yes.
The last year Brady was here in 19, it was a little rough. I thought Nick Folk did a pretty good job last year. Actually, I think he did a really good job last year.
He was great last year.
Last year he was great.
You could definitely tell. So how do you think that kicker competition's going?
I think it's still Folk for now. We're honestly where we sit at camp, we're like almost parallel to the goalpost. So it's really hard to tell what goes in and what doesn't. So Nordin's got a hell of a leg, right? The ball just sounds different coming off his foot, but 72% accuracy in college. He's had his accuracy issues so far in camp. Today with Folk out was the most extensive look we've gotten at him. He was 6 of 8, but he banked one in off the goalpost, and he had another blocked by Matt Judon. Again, Matt Judon, hell of a camp. Like, who blocks a field goal in camp? But, we'll see tomorrow. I still think Nordin's raw. We've seen them do this at other positions where they'll go out and they'll find a guy who's maybe a year or two away and stash him on the practice squad, stash him on IR, and work and develop him. They've never really done it at kicker under Belichick because they haven't had to. Nordin, to me, is one of those guys where I don't know that he's a starting NFL kicker right now, but I feel pretty confident he can be, with a little bit of work. So I think as long as Folk doesn't totally implode, and he had a rough day the other day, but besides that, he's been fine. It's tough to say because kicking's a fickle art, and it can come and go like that. But if Nick Folk is close to what he was last year, because he's one of the best kickers in football last year, if he's close to what he was last year, I don't think they're going to rush Nordin. I think they'll try to get him on the practice squad. Don't be surprised if you see him buried. He might not kick in the preseason. He might not, stop kicking at the end of camp. I don't think they want teams to exactly know what he can do because it'll make it easier to get him onto the practice squad, and then they'll go from there. But, it's interesting. I don't know that I wouldn't call it one of the closer competitions in camp, at least not right now. That can obviously change, but that's one of those positions you can really evaluate pads, no pads, joint practice, whatever. You can evaluate in any practice, and Nick Folk's still Nick Folk. He's a veteran. He's reliable inside of 50 yards. They care more about accuracy than the leg. Like, they want a guy who's reliable but can only hit from 40 and in than a guy who's a little bit erratic but has range from 55 or 60 yards. So Folk's their guy right now. I think he's going to still be their guy for at least another year. And then we'll see. I'm not totally ruling Nordin out long term. I just don't think he's ready quite yet.
Yeah, when you send the kicker out there, you want to have confidence that he's going to drill it. So,
right.
I mean, if he can make it from 40 in, but his range is a little limited, but you feel confident when you're sending him out there, that helps the offense more, and it makes you feel more confident in what's going to be going on. So let's transition into this little, I guess you can call it a game. So we'll give you two guys and just tell us which person you have higher expectations for and who you're most excited to see. So we'll start off with the two tight ends, Hunter Henry and Jonnu Smith.
So I think Hunter Henry's going to be the more highlight reel player, I guess. I'm really excited to see Jonnu Smith just because I want to see how they use him. I think they're going to create a brand new role for him in the offense. I think they're going to line him up outside. They're going to line him up in the slot. They're going to line him up midline. They're going to line him up in the backfield, fullback, running back, shotgun. Like that. I talked about how many different spots Jalen Mills is going to line up in. Jonnu Smith's going to be the equivalent of that on offense. So I'm really excited just to kind of see how they use him. I want to know already. There was this whole mystique when they signed him of what's Josh McDaniels going to do. I want the answer to that question.
You could already see it. There were some highlights of. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, didn't they do a play yesterday where they motioned him into the backfield and threw a toss to him or a sweep or something?
That's what I was just going to say.
Is that what you were? Yeah. I mean, so they're doing stuff with him already.
I think we're going to see some really exotic things from him.
But I mean, just his ability after the catch is exciting. So seeing the different ways that they're going to use a guy like that, and his skill set also complements Hunter Henry's pretty well. Where Hunter Henry's better at, sitting in the soft spot of zones and doing that sort of stuff. So I think they're going to complement each other really well.
And you know what? He's going to unlock James White too. I think James White's due for a big bounce back here because how many times do we see James White 3rd and 5, leak out in the flat, you get him one-on-one with some, big flat-footed middle linebacker, and he makes the guy look silly. And you didn't see that last year. Why not? Mm-hmm. Because, those linebackers had to cover James White because the safeties were preoccupied with tight ends. That hasn't been a problem for the last 2 years. The safeties have been able to take James White That's not going to be a thing this year. Those safeties are going back on the tight ends. You're going to get James White on these bigger, non-coverage linebackers, and he's going to go to town on them. So, Jonnu is going to make everybody on this offense better, not just him.
All right, defensive side of the ball, we got the veteran Dante Hightower versus the newcomer who you have said has had a tremendous camp in Matt Judon.
Who was the first one? Sorry, cut out there.
Dante Hightower, the veteran.
See, I'm just, I'm an Alabama fan. I'm such a Dante Hightower guy. I'll go with new is always better, though. It's kind of like Jonnu Smith. They give Matt Judon all this money, and
exciting.
You see him at camp, and there's some big flashes there, and I want, I've seen what Dante Hightower can do. I haven't necessarily seen what Matt Judon can do, so I'm excited to kind of learn a little bit more about Matthew Judon in the game setting.
Yeah, no, I think watching his highlights and even some of his plays aren't necessarily on highlight tapes because what he does setting the edge, and that's something that he's going to do phenomenally well in this defense, and seeing how Bill uses him in different matchups and maybe puts him in coverage once in a while in favorable matchups, but just his ability to rush the passer, set the edge, and do multiple different things is going to be exciting to see kind of how they have him have his role envisioned in this defense as well.
Yeah, for sure. He is, you talk about the most exciting guys to watch on this team, the most anticipated guys to watch. He's up there.
So this next one's a little bit of a not long term, but I guess this one's kind of over the next 2 years. I'll say Christian Barmore versus Devon Godchaux.
I want to see Barmore, and Godshaw's been exciting. But first of all, like I said, Alabama bias. Barmore's such a unique player, and that's so cool. There's not a ton of guys in the league. That's why, I thought there was a chance they brought Adam Butler back, just because there's really not that many guys in this league that have that skill set. That 300-pound interior defensive lineman who's a pass rusher. You just don't find guys like that every day. And now he's coming out and he's stopping the run too. People threw out, the sexy comp around the draft was Richard Seymour. And obviously, he's going to be a Hall of Famer. That's a lofty goal, but I'm not saying he looks like Richard Seymour, but you could see why that's the comp. And that's pretty damn cool.
You can see similarities in between the two.
Yeah, it's pretty damn cool.
Yeah. All right, offensive side of the ball still. Jacoby Myers or Kendrick Bourne?
You know what? I'm not going to go with the new guy this time. As much as I think Kendrick Bourne, he's been fun to watch. He gets into it at practice. He gets the fans pumped up. I want to see what Jacoby Myers can do in year 3. He had such a strong ending to the year last year. He was on a 1,000-yard pace over the final, whatever it was, 11 games, 12 games, whatever it was there. He could be a breakout guy. He really could be a breakout guy. You talked about Hunter Henry being adept at, finding the hole in the zone and sitting down. That's what Jacoby Myers does. He goes out about, 7 to 12 yards, finds that hole, and he's just going to sit there and he's going to catch the ball. And that's his game. And the Patriots love wide receivers like that. So I think he could have a breakout year. And, a former college quarterback running from the slot, having a breakout year when Julie Nettleman retires. And just, there's some chills there.
It has to happen.
There's some chills there. So I'm really excited. And you know what? He's a guy, too, that, just talking to him, when we get to talk to him, media availability, just a guy who genuinely enjoys everything that's going on. And I think has genuinely worked. You got to work hard to get to the NFL, but a guy who genuinely has worked really hard to get to where he is, and would just be a really cool story to see him, become a real, factor of an NFL wide receiver and a guy that's very easy to root for. Not that Kendrick Bourne isn't, if I'm comparing the two. Kendrick Bourne also happens to be actually a very, very easy guy to root for. But
he's a fan favorite as well already.
Yeah, Jacoby, it would be so cool if Jacoby breaks out this year.
And I'm obviously super excited to see Kendrick Bourne. I'm
excited to see
a new guy in this offense. Yeah, but I'm extremely excited to see Jacoby Myers just because last year everything he did was as a wide receiver 1. So now he's kind of fit back into more of his role. He's going to get more favorable matchups against worse cornerbacks. So I think his talent's just going to show even more because he's going to get better matchups. And this run game with the weapons we have on the outside, I think this run game could have even more success because they're not going to have all 11 guys in the box anymore. You know what I mean? You're going to have to
Right.
have safeties back for Nelson Aguilar. You're going to have people watching out for Jonnu Smith and Hunter Henry. But so the run game improves. You got other weapons on the outside that can open up the field a little bit and have top corners on Nelson Aguilar or maybe Kendrick Bourne or people paying attention to the tight ends. So just going to give Myers even more opportunities and more chances to create and get open, which is why I'm so excited to see what he can do this year.
Yeah, no, absolutely agree with that.
But we'll move on to the next one. One guy we haven't really seen yet, Chase Winovich versus Josh Uche.
Yeah, Winovich was going to be an interesting one because he's a guy I thought was going to have to come out and play multiple positions. The interesting thing was all right, so he's an edge rusher, but he's having trouble setting the edge. At the same time, his best game of the year last year was against Baltimore when he was playing middle linebacker. And he was, a key part in stopping that Baltimore rushing attack. So I wanted to see if they'd bring that back. I wanted to see if he'd play more stand-up, hand on the ground, all that. We haven't seen him because he's on PUP, so it's tough. But he's a guy I think could be in for a really interesting year.
Yeah, I'm excited to see Uche. I think that Uche is going to break out also. Like we mentioned before, I mean, he's explosive. I think he was a little raw coming out of Michigan also, but two Michigan guys right there that I'm excited to see. But last one for me on the defense side of the ball, I'm going to go with newcomer Ronnie Perkins or Dietrich Wise.
Yeah, I really like Dietrich Wise. I do. I think that he put that weight on last year. It made a difference. I think he's a guy who can grow into Lawrence Guy's role, right? Because Lawrence Guy probably has only a year or two left where he can play tackle, he can play end, he can play against the run, he can play against the pass. He just, he's not great at any one thing, but he can give you a little bit of everything, and you need that guy, certainly, in this defense. Been a bit of a slow start for him. He did have a nice pop today. Blew up Alex Redmond in a running drill. Actually popped his helmet off. So that was pretty cool to see. Maybe that jump starts him. I've always been a fan of his. I always thought, he's a somewhat underrated player, so I'm looking forward to seeing him. Ronnie Perkins, too, I think is a guy, kind of like I talked about with Nordine. I think he might be a year away. I think, you can see it. He gets off the line incredibly well, incredibly quickly, but his technique still needs some refining. He's a guy maybe we talk about more for an expanded role in a year or two. He'll make the team, don't get me wrong, and he'll probably play some special teams, and maybe you'll see him late in games if it's already decided, but I don't know, especially with how deep they are on the edge between Judon and Van Noy and Uche, and Hightower's going to play out there. And Terez Hall, when he comes back, right, I don't know that the snaps are there for Ronnie Perkins right away, but he's a guy I'm more excited about long term.
Okay.
You mentioned it earlier on the beat, but it was pretty cool to see his interaction with Teddy Bruschi the other day.
Yes, that was definitely that's encouraging when you see stuff like that.
Yeah, and I think he's had the right mindset the whole time, and him being picked in the third round where he thinks he should have been picked higher. I think that's going to have a chip on his shoulder, and he seems like he's came in and worked. So he's a player I'm excited about as well. But we'll finish it off with two guys playing safety. Both have a lot of potential. Kyle Duggar and Adrian Phillips.
Yeah, two really, really exciting players. I mentioned before with Phillips where I kind of think he could have that year two sort of jump playing that hybrid linebacker role. But, man, how can you not be excited about what Kyle Duggar's bringing to the table? And, supreme athlete. I think the other thing is he played primarily in the box last year. He'll probably do that a good amount, too, this year. But he was a deep safety in college. He didn't play in the box in college. That was all new to him.
Yeah.
I think they're going to throw him on the back end next to Devin McCourty at times. I think we're going to get to see him as a ball hawk, which with his speed and explosiveness, I think there's a ton of potential there. He was sneaky good at rushing the passer last year. I don't think he's going to do that a ton. But, that's a play that I could see it being, late in a game, 3rd and 6, you got to have it, send Duggar. And maybe only do that once a game. But as a gotta-have-it kind of defensive play, I think that there's some potential there. So, like I said with Judon, you talk about the most anticipated players of the year at any position. I think Kyle Duggar's in that top 5 for the Patriots.
And you got a taste of it in the Baltimore game as well, of his ability to anticipate certain things and stop the run as well, and just do different stuff like that. He's super explosive. He can follow somebody behind the line and then just shoot the gap and go make the tackle. So he had a great game against Baltimore last year, but I mean, he's got so much physical talent. If he can refine his skills a little bit in coverage, and we can use him to cover tight ends as well, I mean, he's just going to be a chess piece that will be, I think, a core part of this defense for years to come.
Yeah, and kind of like I talked about with the outside corners, they have so much depth in the box between Mills and Phillips and Duggar, obviously, and maybe Adrian Colbert, if he makes the team, a guy I liked coming into camp. They're going to be able to rotate these guys and keep them fresh, and it makes a difference. It does, because if you're trying to get off a block at the end of a game and you've played 50 snaps and the other guy's played 70, there's an inherent advantage there. You have fresher legs, so.
Yeah, absolutely. We're both personally rooting for Colbert. He came on the podcast a couple weeks ago.
You guys had? Yeah, how was he? He seems like a fun guy.
He's awesome. I mean, he's awesome. He's so nice, super down to earth, super chill. But yeah, no, he's really awesome. He's a funny guy. Seems like he always has a smile on his face. One of those guys. So yeah, no, we're definitely rooting for him. But I guess kind of what's your expectations overall for this team this year? Defense side of the ball, offense side of the ball as well. How good do you think this team can be? I guess kind of record predictions as well. But,
right.
But like, what are your kind of expectations of what this team can be?
They should be a top 5 scoring defense. I had Jerry Thornton of Barstool Sports on my 98.5 The Sports Hub podcast earlier today. He said they should be the number 1 scoring defense in the league. And, weird things could happen here or there. I think that's a tough projection to make, but they should be top 5 scoring defense, absolutely. Offensively, it's tough because when you don't know what you're going to get at the quarterback position, it makes it so hard to project anything. If they get even just slightly above average quarterback play, they should be a 10-11 win team, at least a wild card team. That might win the division. I actually think the Bills, for a number of reasons, I think the Bills are going to take a big step back this year. So that can be in play. That being said, if you get the quarterback play you got last year, you're probably going to win 7 games again. So they added the talent around the position, and that's exciting. And that, if they get good quarterback play last year, whether they finish 7-9, they probably flip that 9-7, maybe 10-6. This year, if they get good quarterback play, I think you're looking at 10, 11, 12 wins because the talent around the quarterback's better and the defense is better too. But they're going to go as far as the defense takes them. Again, I think they'll be a top 5 scoring defense. They're trying to come out and win games 13-6. If the offense can just not turn the ball over, they'll be able to do that. But we saw Cam have trouble with turnovers last year. Max, a rookie, turnovers are going to be an issue with him, you think, when he comes up. So it's going to come down to turnovers. And they got a good coach for a team that's built that way, because we know Bill Belichick stresses turnovers above all else. But if they get decent quarterback play, they hold on to the football. A dip from the Bills, which, again, I think is very possible, and they're going to be right there for the division.
The Bills are the top dogs. I think you mentioned it before. Josh Allen, when you have a season like you had, like the season he had last year, people are going to be gunning for you, just like the Bills. They're
right.
Top of the division. They went to the AFC Championship games. Teams are now going to be going for the Bills. So when you got kind of a target on your back, teams are going to be game planning for you even more and kind of paying attention to what you did to have success last year. So I agree. I think we could see the Bills have a little bit of regression next season, along with maybe Josh Allen.
So what's interesting, if you look at it, over the last 4 years, there's one team every year that gets crowned as the next big thing that they don't all fall apart, but they all take a step back. All right. In 2017, you had that Jaguars team. They had a lead in the fourth quarter in Gillette Stadium in the AFC Championship.
Like 20-10, right?
Think about that. That team was up in the fourth quarter against the Patriots in the AFC Championship game 4 years ago. They just picked first overall. And remember, people were into that team. They were into that team. And it's not all their fault. Guys wanted out, guys left. But, it was – they got this great defense. They got a strong running game. Bortles, people thought, he's progressing. He's getting better. He's not good, but he's getting better. And they were like, this team's going to be a problem for the next couple of years. That didn't happen. 2018, the Rams, another team that happened to get set aside by the Patriots. But, McVay was the next NFL mastermind, and people looked at Jared Goff and said that, he's finally playing like a first overall pick, right? McVay and Goff, like, this is the new Brady and Belichick. This pairing is going to be unstoppable, and they've revolutionized offense in the NFL. What have they done since? They, I think, won 2 playoff games since. Jared Goff is now out in L.A. He got traded. in essentially a win now move. They didn't feel like he was the guy who was going to let them capitalize on their window. He goes to Detroit to restart a rebuild. So that thing, again, the Rams are decent. They're not quite the 2017 Jaguars, but that team was not nearly what everybody thought they'd be after their run in 2018. Then you had the Ravens in 2019. Great season. Lamar Jackson wins MVP. He was excellent. They weren't a bad team last year, but the book was out on them. They showed their flaws. They struggled at times. They didn't win their division. They had that tough loss in the playoffs. They did win one playoff game, but then they have that tough loss against Buffalo where you really saw the warts and all. And I think they were probably closer to the team we saw last year than the team we saw in 2019. So, again, you get one of these teams every year. Josh Allen's a guy who completed about 50% of his passes a season going all the way back to high school. He comes out and completes 74%. Even with Stephon Diggs, I can't believe that's sustainable. I don't know that he goes back down to 50. Maybe he's in the mid-60s, but you don't have a massive jump like that, and that's just who you are now. That's not how it works. You had older players on that team that, probably should have regressed but didn't. Every single what if the Bills had last year went right. You're going to have some of those flip back the other way. Then on top of that, you have the COVID issue and the vaccine issue with that team, and you can tell that that's kind of driving guys nuts. I don't think they're going to be a bad team. I still think they should win the division, but they're not going to be the wagon they were last year. They're not going to be the borderline Super Bowl contender they were last year. I don't think so.
And especially the Jaguars collapse is kind of like the extreme of that.
The Jaguars,
scenario,
right? The Jaguars are the extreme, but I mean, you look at the Rams and the Ravens, what they were, right? The Ravens were right there. They were right there with the Chiefs, and everybody said this is going to be the rivalry. It's going to be the Chiefs and the Ravens, and they got embarrassed by the Bills in that playoff game, right? Yeah, they lost Tennessee in the playoffs, and then they come back the next year. They had some bad losses last year. They won a lot of games, but they had some bad losses. That's what I think the Bills could be. They'll be around 11, 12 wins, but there was a dominance to them last year that I just don't think they're going to have this year. Like, we're not going to be talking about Josh Allen. I don't think we're going to be talking about Josh Allen as an MVP candidate this year. And if he wins MVP, you can clip that. I feel comfortable making that statement.
If he wins MVP, we'll delete it. We won't clip it. We won't. No, but it was weird. Like the Ravens beat a 12-4 Patriots team, and then they lost to us last year.
Right, like that was a bad loss. Like that team was discombobulated at times last year. So yeah, the Jaguars are the extreme, but you look at what happened in the Rams, you look at what happened in the Ravens. I don't think it's unrealistic to think that happens to the Bills.
And now the Rams don't have a first round pick until like 2045. So
right,
so that's also not in their favor. So I guess we'll one more kind of to wrap it up a little bit.
Sure.
Predictions on Mac Jones, and if you had to kind of predict when you think he starts his first game.
I think the earliest,
if at all, this year.
Yeah. So I think Bill's going to lean on Cam as much as he can because he likes the experience. There's a strong relationship there. I think the earliest we see Mac Jones, this is if everything goes wrong, I think the earliest you see Mac Jones is week 5. Start off maybe 1-3. You get your doors blown off by Tampa. You're going on the road, but you're playing a horrible team in the Houston Texans. There's really not a lot at stake. I think that's the earliest you start it. What's tricky about the schedule is there's not a ton of obvious landmarks to start Mac Jones. I think
after week 5, right? Because it's like Texans, Jets. That's a good spot.
So,
but after that, you're getting
5 and 6.
And...
Yeah, the bye super late. You look at can they do it with the bye? But after the bye, there's only 3 games left, and maybe they do it.
Yeah,
if maybe they're totally out of it at that point and they do it right. The latest you see Mac Jones, if they're still like competing for a playoff spot, I think is after week 11 against Atlanta, because they'll have that longer week on the other side. They'll go Thursday to the next Sunday. That's probably the latest you see it if they're still in contention. If they're not in contention, you might see it week 17. But or if they have everything locked up, you might see it week 17. It could go that way too. I don't think that'll be the case. But it's either going to be a month in or a month to go, I think, is when you're going to see him.
Yeah, so that week 5 you have the Texans and then Cowboys, Jets, Chargers, and Panthers. So that's a nice little stretch of some not phenomenal defenses where that'd be probably a good spot to start him. But that feels like a little bit early for them to pull Cam already, seeing how long it took them last year. I know Mac and Jarrett Stidham are in very different situations, but then you get later in the year and you got the Browns, you got Tennessee, the Bills, the Colts, the Bills. So later in the year seems like a tough spot. So it just the schedule kind of didn't work out in a favorable place for Mac Jones to start somewhere later in the year or after a bye week. And so that's what's kind of tough is that week 5 spot seems like kind of the sweet spot, but that could be a little bit too early.
Yeah, it's, and ultimately, as it should, it's going to come down to performance. And if Newton's rolling, they're going to stick with him. I don't think they're going to, what the Dolphins did last year, right, where Ryan Fitzpatrick was playing well and they still made the switch. I don't think Bill would do something like that. So it's ultimately going to come down to performance and both the individual and the team performance. Even if they're, even if Cam's okay, but they're 5-2, 6-2, he's still probably going to stick with them because they're winning football games. And that's, it's a results-driven business. Cam would have to be pretty bad for them to win football games and him still get pulled. And I don't know, outside of a historic performance from the defense, like multiple pick sixes a game, I don't know that Cam could be that as bad as he would need to be and then still actually win games.
And that's the last thing I want to see is the kind of the Tua situation that you just mentioned is, I mean, they had to pull him against the Raiders because he wasn't performing and then put Ryan Fitzpatrick in to go win the game in the fourth quarter. It's like that's got to hurt a rookie's confidence. I don't want to see them throw Mac in the fire too early and have his confidence ruined. Like you've mentioned before, if we lose 4 more games this year for 10 more years of success, that's right. Something that I think all Patriots fans would take. So I don't want to see him throw in the fire too early and have that situation kind of be like it is with Tua, where nobody believes in him. His confidence is going to be tarnished a little bit, I think. I mean, I'm sure he's not paying attention to the media to that extent, but I just think throwing him in at the right time and making sure that it's not too early and it's not a bad situation for him is going to be key.
And the other thing you have to remember is, and I think this has escaped some people, I don't think they can go back. I think once you make that switch, you make that switch. I don't know, obviously pending injury, I don't know how that's going to look. I don't know how that's going to look if you switch to Mac and then you go back to Cam, especially if it's an issue of Cam performing poorly. Like, you get one shot to get this right. Don't rush it. Don't force it. Do it when it feels natural. Do it at the right time.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's it for me. You got anything else, Chase?
No, I was just, listening. We said this all the other day with Gillette Nation. I don't know when it is. I don't know what it's going to have to be for Mac to win the job or Cam to lose the job. It's for us to see because, like I mentioned, playing 7-on-7, 11-on-11 football without pads in training camp where guys aren't contesting the ball too much in the air and, you can't hit the quarterback live is a totally different game. So I'm excited to see, like you mentioned, the joint practices. I'm excited to see the preseason games and then once Cam actually steps on the field where his progression is. But I just like to say, Alex, thanks for coming on. This was awesome. Make sure you guys go follow him on Twitter. It's at the real Alex Barth.
Like Facebook.
The Sports Hub.
Just real out. Just like
real Alex
right.
Barth.
Have you guys seen The Social Network or am I aging myself here? The Facebook movie, Justin Timberlake.
I haven't.
Oh, you should watch it. It's a really good movie.
No.
That reference just went right over your heads.
Yeah.
Do you guys know that Facebook was originally called The Facebook?
I don't.
Oh, you make me feel old. Go watch The Social Network. It's a good movie. That'll explain that reference. Hopefully somebody listening got that reference.
I'm sure there's someone out there. So
yeah.
No, so it's at real Alex Barth.
Yep.
Make sure you follow 98.5 The Sports Hub, CLNS Media. Listen to his podcast, and then listen to his live streams and stuff with Evan Lazar. But no, thank you, Alex, for coming.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. Anytime.
Yeah, no, huge thank you for coming on. Everybody,
for sure,
go listen if you don't already to the Patriots Beat podcast. They do it pretty much every day after training camp. Other than that, usually Tuesdays and Thursdays, I think, around 4 or 5 that time. So yeah, no, huge thank you to you for coming on. This was awesome. I'd love to do it again sometime, maybe closer to the season. But come back next week. Towards the end of the week, we'll have another episode out. So until then, we'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to this edition of the Patriots Drive podcast. Follow us on social media to stay up to date with all things New England Patriots. Make sure you tune in to the next episode and check out patriotsdrive.com for more great content.
We're on to Cincinnati.